was in university, staff always recommended these various programs for the students to enroll in to better help them prepare themselves for finding a good job and getting that career that they desired. After personally being recommended through my university's foreign studies program, I didn't think too much of it at the time because I figured that I wouldn't have been picked for the program, that there wasn't any harm in it just to see what might happen, nothing more. But then a few weeks after I had done the paperwork, I was notified after one of my classes that I was to go to one of the educational offices to speak with a staff member about possibly spending a semester abroad. I had been picked. I was chosen. I was chuffed. I was excited actually, as I decided to head through my campus to where the faculty offices were. As I went to the office, greeted the faculty member there after sitting down and heard what they had to say. The staff member mentioned that though my grades were average when compared to a lot of the other candidates who had applied to the program, when I asked why I desired to study internationally, my responses as well as my body language was unique. Well, according to them at least. I spoke from the heart, and the staff member told me that they didn't hear too much of that anymore, as most of the other replies seemed rehearsed or fake, and that was why I was chosen. But the staff member later told me that the country I was to be studying in was actually a former country that had been in a decade-long war against one of its neighbors and actually fended off the invasion. The country was still rebuilding itself, but its technology and national science program was advanced for the region, and I was suggested to head there to study, help rebuild, and get recommendations. The staff member gave me some information to review as I later looked at the details. I didn't know a single aspect of the language of the country. I couldn't read, write, or speak it. When I mentioned this, the staff member said that I'd be offered a few days of free language courses to help get me ready for the international program. I didn't really have any commitments at the time. No real friends, no girlfriend, just a miserable part-time job that didn't really care if I left to go overseas to begin with. So after taking some basic language classes, I could barely communicate in the foreign language of the country, and then I was well on my way. When I had gotten off the plane, even at the airport, there were still signs of the war everywhere. There were signs that the country was rebuilding and the people were living their lives and trying to do the best that they could with the situations that they had. Later on, I eventually settled into the campus. I spent my free time helping to rebuild various locations on the campus or even near it. My university peers liked my positive attitude and optimism, so I was a welcome addition to the university there. They helped me improve my fluidity with the language, so as a result I was able to speak a little bit more, and I made a few friends, and I was invited to some of the crude clubs on social ventures that the young people gathered at when they weren't attending their classes, and with everything considered, I was actually having a very good time there with my experience. With everything that I had done, I was actually recommended for an extension for an extra second semester. I had a few recommendations by some of the staff and faculty, and many people did vouch for me. On my country's embassy and actual university back home approved it. Some of the friends I had made were actually wanting me to stay a little bit longer, and once it was approved, some of the people that I've gotten to know decided to give me a party, and we were all celebrating that night. So once the party was done, I decided to head back to the dorms where I was staying, but the party hall that they reserved for the celebration was in a more distant part of the capital, but there wasn't a taxi to help me get back to my dormitory, so I had to walk. I didn't think too much about it as I could walk off the food and drink that I had. Walking around and through the ruined buildings on rubble, I heard something. I didn't know what. I was eventually registered in my mind as a scream. In that moment, I remembered what I was still doing in a battle-scarred country, and that there was a risk, a very real risk, to everything that I was doing. Deciding to run to where I had heard the scream, I actually saw a woman that was about to be assaulted by a group of men. Looking around quickly, I tossed and threw some bricks out of the rubble at them, making loud noise myself, shouting and making a scene. I even picked up a pipe and banged it against ruined cars and other debris. Eventually, other people came and I pointed out what was happening with the woman and the thugs, and a whole mob came to help. Myself and the mob attacked the thugs, and and we actually saved the woman's life. Others in the group called the police and the thugs were arrested. I was later considered a hero, and I didn't really want any of the attention. I was just here to study. I just did the right thing. But aside from that, I continued my studies, and not long, the second semester was about to end and I was to return to my own country. Shortly before I was scheduled to leave, I was contacted by someone. Someone somehow had gotten my cellular phone number and actually desired to meet with me. The person on the phone mentioned that the woman that I had saved was actually the daughter of one of the generals who had fought in the war. The woman was grateful for me saving her life, and as a result, they wanted to give me something. It was to be completely secret though. I was naturally curious as to why, which was why they had waited for the attention on me as a result of saving her from the thugs to die down, and they wanted to get in contact with me before I left the country. They agreed to meet me in my dormitory later that night. As I think too much of it, I was waiting in my dorm, and I just figured that I'd get some sort of medal or commendation from the government, something simple. The scheduled time had passed, and I was wondering what was happening. Eventually, when I was about to give up hope, I heard a knock at the door. I opened it, and I looked outside. I didn't see anyone. I then suddenly felt myself then hit on the back of my head, then blackness. I felt dazed and distant. Eventually, I awoke and felt myself tied to a chair. Something like a hood covering my head violently shaked and made noise. I was also gagged. I couldn't really make any sounds. What was happening? What is all this? The hood is later removed, and I looked around to see armed soldiers all around me. They were all wearing special operations clothing and had gear. Some even had weapons pointed at me as I was frightened. I didn't know what to think. Two men came in, one wearing a doctor's lab coat and another older man in officer's attire. I crudely spoke to them in their language as to why they had captured me and what was the reason for all this. One of the operatives released my grog, and the doctor spoke. The reason why I was abducted was that I was in a secret governmental facility, and that the officer was the general who had fought in the war. The doctor mentioned that I had saved his daughter's life, and they wanted to give me an implant. I didn't understand what they meant, as the doctor explained further. The country had fought off the invasion of its hostile neighbor because of the advanced technology that the country had. That is what the international community knows. As the doctor further mentioned that the war wasn't won through a conventional military tactics, but by soldiers who were implanted by doctors who were enhanced by medical means, these literal implants, to increase their various abilities and make them superhuman. This wasn't, of course, to be made public, because if it were to be made public across the country or even internationally, it might provoke unrest against the government. The general's daughter was adamant that I be given an implant out of gratitude for saving her life, as that was part of the culture in this country, and the general actually agreed. The general stepped back for a moment and then came back with a briefcase and put it onto a table in front of me, as the soldiers around me stood back and lowered their weapons. As one of the soldiers released me, the doctor slowly walked over to the briefcase and opened it. My eyes darting around as I tried to breathe slowly. Inside the briefcase was a number of items. The doctor mentioned that when I was captured and taken to the facility, I was medically examined, and these particular items were offered to me due to my personal mental health and physical conditioning. The doctor pointed to a pair of what appeared to be green retinas in a small vial of clear liquid. The doctor spoke and said that my eyes are somewhat weak, and that if I had desired these, I could be operated on and have them surgically implanted. I would be able to see perfectly for up to 60 meters. I'd be colorblind, green and purple, as well as have permanent red blotches in my eyes due to the imperfect technology of the implants. The doctor then pointed to a small red transmitter device, as the doctor mentioned that it would be surgically implanted into the base of my spine. I'd be able to mentally influence anyone within 2 meters of me. But the doctor quickly mentioned that this wasn't mind control, but the better I knew the person in particular, the easier it would be to influence them to do whatever I desired. But I'd have very minor back pain for the rest of my life as a result of the implant into the base of my spine. The doctor then pointed to a small silver-colored pill. As the doctor mentioned that due to my evaluation, there was a 50% chance I'd develop some form of dementia when I'd grow older. As he said to me that if I were to swallow the pill, I'd actually be free of the dementia. However, I'd have an intensive migraine twice a week for the rest of my life. As to when the migraines would occur during the said week, it would be completely random. The doctor then pointed to a thin blue membrane. He said to me that it would be implanted into my neck as it would later be absorbed into my brain, as it would enable me to perfectly read, write, and speak the language of the country, as well as immediate other languages and dialects related to it linguistically. The doctor mentioned that it was somewhat useless to me as a foreigner, but if I was to stay within the country, it would become invaluable in terms of everyday life. The doctor then pointed to a small vial of purple liquid. He explained that if I were to drink it, the muscles in my body would react to the vial, and as a result I would be able to lift double the heaviest amount I had ever lifted in my life according to muscle memory. But I'd have intensive pain throughout that particular part of my body that I'd used the muscles for exactly 1 hour afterwards. The doctor then pointed to 2 syringes filled with gold-colored liquid. He explained that it would prolong my life, but the process was flawed. If I was to use the doctor would inject me with 1 syringe right there. Then I'd be allowed to leave with the 2nd syringe. Then I was to wait a various amount of years before injecting myself with the 2nd syringe. The amount of years in between the injections would be amount of time that my life would be extended. But if the 2nd syringe is damaged in any way, then I wouldn't be able to fully extend my life due to fluid contamination. The doctor then pointed to a silvery bottle of small tablets, as he explained that I'd have to take them once a month for the remainder of the year, as it would make me immune to getting any sort of disease up until that particular day. However, I'd lose one of my senses. As to which one of my senses I'd lose, it'd be completely random due to the tablet clashing with my individual genetic composition. With everything said, the doctor as well as the general and the other soldiers were silent. I still couldn't believe what was happening to me. All of these implants, these medicine samples, were they all serious? Would I actually be allowed to leave with one of these implants? I didn't know what to say. What could I say? As I slowly shook my head in disbelief for a final time. With everything that had happened that day, I still remembered my particular choice. I didn't regret at all what I decided to do. I mean, if you were in my situation, what would you have done?